If it's shootouts you want, it's shootouts you shall get in week 3 for daily fantasy football. We have got 3 games with a total of 54.5 or higher. We've got a couple games that I think could potentially be interesting as well. So we're going to have some fun games to discuss. Let's break those down, talk about key injuries, break down what we are looking at, and our favorite plays on FanDuel for week number 3. Welcome on into the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com. Joined here as always by Brandon Gadula. He is the managing editor for numberFire.com. Brandon, week number 3 coming in hot. How you doing today?
I'm good. I've been doing a lot of prep for the Ryder Cup, but that's all done and over with. So I just get to dig back into NFL. I get to enjoy the Ryder Cup Friday, Saturday as I'm prepping, digging in even more for the NFL slate, but still overcoming the what could have been with the Dallas and Chargers game last week, but that is not going to prevent me from stacking up the games with the high totals this week. Don't let it do that to you either.
Were you able to watch that game, or were you on Red Zone on Sunday?
I'm Red Zone, but I always just watch Red Zone.
Okay. Because I was watching that game, watching it pretty intently because I had a lot in that game. It was one of the most frustrating games I've watched in a very long time, just because it was so close to being amazing so many times, and just penalties, weird stuff happening. That was frustrating. And we do have similar situations to this week. And with the potential shootouts for week number 3, you can see paths to them being disappointing for sure, but I think the odds that those paths hit are fairly low. And I think that if you play out that Chargers and Cowboys game 16 times, I don't think it hits that the way it did very often. So we're still gonna be talking stacks, racking them up, and breaking down the way we always want to stack those games, talking about overall process, still some of that in the trends discussion for this week, talking about some usage trends we've seen as well, and breaking down key injuries, which are a focal point for this week. Before we talk about the slate overview for week number 3, though, want to remind you that the Listener League is back. It is a $5 entry, 3 entries max with no rake. So if you want to get entered, go to FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. I'm going to cheat and tell you that that's going to be the link every week. So you don't have to tune in every week. You should tune in every week. But if you just want to get in on the contest before our week 3 or before our weekly preview podcast, FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. Again, $5 entry, 3 entries max, no rake. Go get yourself some cash via the Listener League for this week. Also, quick heads up that if you are looking to bet on the Monday Night Football game, FanDuel has a good offer for you, making it even bigger by giving new customers 30-1 odds on either team to win between the Cowboys and the Eagles. Simply download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today and bet on the most anticipated matchup of the week, I guess. See for yourself why FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Must be 21 plus and present in Arizona, Colorado, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, or West Virginia. New users only. $10 first deposit required. Must wager in designated offer market. Max bonus $150. See full terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Restrictions apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Tennessee, call the Red Line at 1-800-899-9789. In West Virginia, 1-800-GAMBLER.net. And in Arizona, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. Let's start things off here by taking a broad look at week number 3, Brandon, and talking about the key things standing out to you for this slate. When you look at this slate, look at the way things break down, what is standing out to you?
Just those big games, and it has to be, you try to figure out how you're going to navigate through those games, and that is just something that I think everyone is going to be dealing with. And then it's also going to be how you kind of include those maybe second tier games, which kind of more specifically just jumping out to me is Arizona and Jacksonville, and then Baltimore and Detroit to some degree. Obviously, we expected probably a lot of people expected Detroit not to be very relevant at all, but they have DeAndre Swift, they have TJ Hawkinson, they have some bringbacks, and with Baltimore, actually focusing on a receiver. That game has a lot of appeal. So obviously we're looking at those top 3 games, but there are some other fun games too. And with that, was that
Sorry,
was
it's a
that
dog.
was that Rosa?
Yeah,
She's
very mad about
uh-oh.
something.
She says don't play the Lions.
Yeah, no, she's not into it. Either that, or she was like, "Why aren't you using Jared Goff with T.J.
Yeah.
Hawkinson instead of Marquise Brown?"
Yeah. But what kind of the thing that jumped out to me, and I know it's supposed to be like a 1-sentence overview, but the 1 sentence would be there are like 3 great games, 2 other good games, and then once we get that many games, just cross off the games.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty easy to do this week. And like the ones you're crossing off, I think the bookmakers have this pretty correct. A lot of the ones with the lowest totals are the ones that I had the least interest in. The one with a lower total that I think is semi-interesting is Washington Buffalo. We'll talk about that one in the trend section, talking about some pace there. But like, can you name a single dude you want to use in Saints Patriots? Like Kamara's fine, but like, do you actively want to use him over some other dudes?
No.
They're pretty easy cross-offs in this slate. I think my overview, if I'm deviating from yours, is the thinness of running back this week, because the number of running backs I want to use is not a long list, especially because we don't know Darrell Henderson's status. We don't know if I can use Jonathan Taylor because it might be Jacob Eason or it might be Brett Hundley starting for the Colts. Probably will be one of those guys for this week. Can't really feel great about that. Joe Mixon's facing a really tough defense. I still like him. I like David Montgomery enough, but like the guys I feel great about, the list is small. Henry, Dalvin, Eckler, Saquon. It's that list. There is no one else who I feel great about for this week, which may mean a couple things. It may mean that's a very tight core running back, which I'd be ecstatic about. I love that. But it also could mean might use a receiver in the flex a bit this week, which I don't typically do on FanDuel, given that running backs tend to be undersalaried relative to their performance. So I don't tend to use receivers there, but I think it's at least in play this week because I don't want to get overexposed to running back plays I'm not fully convinced on this week.
Yeah. That would have been the secondary story for me for the week. So I'm glad that you shouted that out at the top of the show. I think the receiver at the flex is a little bit justifiable this week. We don't really do that. And, again, in this house, we spend up for our running backs when it comes to our FanDuel salaries. But who can we spend? Like, who do we?
There's no Aaron Jones. There is no Christian McCaffrey.
No.
There's no Mark Ingram on this slate. Like, come on. Like, how are we supposed to handle that?
Yeah.
Like we lose a lot of key guys, and that makes that second tier running back awful this week.
Yes. So, I mean, it's Derrick Henry at 9,700 and Dalvin Cook at 9,500. And then, I mean, literally, there's nobody else that we can allocate that much salary to because third is Alvin Kamara at 8,000. So we have some pass catchers in those shootouts, specifically Tyreek Hill at 8,700 and Travis Kelce at 8,500.
Right.
Playing a receiver in the 5,000 range at your flex, or always play your later guys in the flex. So just kind of if your fourth receiver is a lower salary guy, getting back up to them or to back up to Kyler. There's a lot of viability doing that. So I think that's a great call for you. Yeah.
And it's going to be a pretty tight week, which is good. Again, I want to keep my core tights. This is a positive, but does make me a little nervous for sure. Let's take a look at some key injuries this week, and a lot of them are at quarterback. Starting off with the Dolphins, no Tua Tagovailoa this week. He's got some cracked ribs, which doesn't sound fun. Jacoby Brissett will start in his place. Any interest in the Dolphins here with Brissett starting, and how does this impact your view of the Raiders' offense here if the Dolphins might not be as able to keep pace?
No Dolphins, and has to lower me on the Raiders. I still would have some interest in Darren Waller just because he's coming off of a down game. And again, I mean, if we expect that one team runs away with a football game, they have to kind of put up points. And that's going to come through Darren Waller for the Raiders or Henry Ruggs. I don't know if I want to get too involved with Henry Ruggs in a game where it might not be competitive just because those downfield shots may not need to be very prevalent. I'm just confused, and I don't know. Like, I'm obviously missing something, but why is the spread 3.5 here?
I mean, let me see here. Well, I don't have these games in chronological order, and it's messing my brain. Okay, it's actually 4.5 now.
Okay.
I have it at 3.
Okay.
Which is a little scary. That's after an adjustment. I think it adjusted down without Tua.
Okay.
Let me double check that though.
I mean, so it could stay. It could stay then.
So I've got their passing offense projected to be pretty bad, but because of their defense is so good, I think that having it be a relatively tight spread makes sense.
Okay.
And defense is a pretty small factor in my stuff, but like their defense is. I mean, I know they let up 35 to the Bills, but that was not in the defense. That was all offense, letting up that 35. So I think it's fair to have a tight spread. Does not mean that I think it's going to be a hyper competitive fun game.
Yeah.
So I don't know. We'll see on that one. I agree with you where Dolphins don't really interest me too much. Brissett looked terrible in that game.
Yeah. That
offensive line is hideous. Waller's fine.
Yeah. It's just one of those games where you ask yourself, can I envision myself at what's this, as a 4:00 game? So can I envision myself at 7 p.m. Eastern tilting that I didn't stack this game?
Nope. No FOMO. Carson Wentz didn't practice Wednesday with 2 sprained ankles, which I've done, by the way.
You bring that up a lot. Often enough.
Great.
Yeah.
It was great. Great times. If he can't go, it sounds like Jacob Eason or Brett Hundley might start. Like Hundley might actually be the dude. So what's your outlook for the Colts if Wentz is not able to go here? We're assuming that he's not going to go. How are you viewing them if it is either Eason or Hundley starting this game for the Colts?
I already am historically down on the Colts pass catchers just because they haven't ever recently given anyone like significant target share. Michael Pittman has been kind of carving out a little bit of an outlier role relative to what this team typically does, but I don't want to tie that up with presumably inefficient passing. Not that we're big Carson Wentz guys anyway. I think the real thing is it takes me off of Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah.
And it would lower my interest in the Titans pass catchers, but I don't think I'm going to talk myself out of Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I think that Taylor's the big person who gets dinged here. Taylor and then Julio, AJ Brown are the ones who get most dinged as a result of this. Because if you had Carson Wentz in this game, it could be one of those second tier potential shootouts you were talking about where, okay, I could see this one actually being kind of fun. That's less likely to happen now with Eason / Hundley starting. So I think to me, it's kind of not Henry only, but it's very, very close to that. I need a lot of lineups to get to Taylor. Like if I have, like, let's say we're doing like a 20 max contest, I'm not getting to Taylor there. I don't think. I think I would just stay constant in the others. Like you're doing 150 max, like he's talented. I think they'll probably run the ball quite a bit. You could see it there, but like for most of you who are not 150 maxing out there, I don't think Taylor is a dude I want to get to there. And it does impact Tannehill, AJ Brown, and Julio. Andy Dalton going to miss week 3 due to his knee injury, which stinks because I feel bad for him at this point, which means that Justin Fields, though, will start for the Bears. That's the one consolation here. Fields is $6,500 facing the Browns in Ohio. Little coming back home narrative with Justin Fields, who played at Ohio State. We can twist this any way we want. What are your thoughts on Fields at $6,500 this week?
So I historically would have been all over this situation because of the 10 rushing attempts last week and the low salary. But the elite passers have very similar rushing ability, but also can throw the ball more than what we saw from Justin Fields. I'm very high on Justin Fields long term, but I think the question you have to ask yourself this week is, let's say you roster Fields at 6,500. What is it really getting you unless it's either a double Henry Dalvin lineup, which is awesome, or getting the ability to play Travis Kelce more easily? And so if you're not going to probably allocate that savings to get to Dalvin and Henry, just be careful. Even if you're building 20 lineups, that not every single one of your Justin Fields lineups is tied to Travis Kelce. That's just something that I would point out. So I think I would have more appeal in Fields if I had more running backs to want to get to.
I think that because Kelsey is so desirable, that does increase my interest in Fields. Just because I think it's very similar to the Jalen Hurts situation against Arizona last year, where the rushing is good, which gives him a solid floor, but also increases his ceiling. And then I have a good prior on his passing abilities, especially if you give him a full week of practice to prepare for this game. The Browns defense has been susceptible. We saw Tyrod Taylor rip them up before he got hurt. We saw the Chiefs be able to come back pretty easily against them. I feel like this game, I'm not betting the over at 45.5, although honestly, maybe I should. I'm looking at my projected offensive efficiency numbers, and it's actually not that bad. Maybe I should bet the over game. It went down, so maybe I can wait and bet it. That's kind of interesting. Yeah.
I'm going to use Justin Fields, but I'm not quite as high on him as I would be if the slate was shaping up a little bit differently. And I mean, we still have these elite passers. Like Kyler could put up 40 on the Jaguars. And if you, I know it's a difference of what, 2,500 in salary, I guess.
But at some point you need points. So
you can't replace those points always, unless Travis Kelce's putting up 15 more points than any other tight end, which is possible. But his ceiling is only so high as a tight end still.
I think with, if I'm tiering out quarterbacks, I think that Mahomes and Wilson are in a tier of their own. I think Kyler is in that second tier just because the salary's a bit higher. So second tier, well, actually, no, Kyler's top tier. Russell, Mahomes, Kyler in the top tier. And then Fields to me is in that second tier with Lamar, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert. I think that Fields is in that second tier. And then the question is, how much do I use that second tier? I think he's near the top of that second tier considering the salary, but I don't want to get too spread out at quarterback. And that's my concern here. So I do still want to get to him, but I want to make sure I'm not doing it at the expense of Mahomes, Wilson, Kyler, etc. On the other side of that game, the Browns will not have Jarvis Landry, but Odell Beckham may be good to go. He was a full participant in Wednesday's practice for the first time this year. So how are you viewing the Browns offense if we assume Odell plays against this Bears defense?
Obviously higher. I know. Oh boy, 6,500 for Odell is. It could be. He's going to be game stacks only. I think honestly, all exposure to this game might be game stacks only. At least many. If I want some Darnell Mooney, just kind of running back with Odell. I don't think I'm going to play Darnell Mooney by himself or Allen Robinson by himself. Cole Kmet's a little bit interesting, but for this offense overall, it's going to elevate me. But we talked about them on the recap show on Monday, and they kind of have some market share concerns.
Yeah, they do. And heading into week one, I was high on Odell because I was like, okay, he's had the full offseason. He's been running well in practice. It seemed like getting good reports. My optimism around him has gotten a lot lower because he sat out those 2 games. So I'm going to use Odell. I think that, in my Fields lineups, I think that he is the most logical piece to use as a bring back. I don't need a bring back here because I think that a lot of the appeal in Fields revolves around his rushing.
Mm-hmm.
So I run it back every time with quarterback, maybe an exception to Fields this week though. But Odell will be the top guy to go to there. Cause Chubb, whatever, he's a great football player. Just the DFS role leaves something to be desired at that salary. Don't want to use Hunt. Can't use Donovan Peoples-Jones, Anthony Schwartz with Odell back. The tight ends rotate. So it's kind of Odell or bust. And I'm okay going with the bust half of that at times, even in my Fields lineups. Before the big matchup with the Rams, the Bucs placed Antonio Brown on the COVID-19 list. The Bucs have a 100% vaccination rate, which means that Brown is vaccinated, which means that if he has 2 negative tests 24 hours apart, he could play still on Sunday. So we can't talk about definitives here with Antonio Brown. He could still play. We'll talk about the Bucs in the bookmakers section. Darrell Henderson didn't practice Wednesday due to a rib injury. It sounds like he'll try it out Friday to see how he can go, but that doesn't sound the most optimistic, I would say. Sony Michelle will be a next man up. He's $5,700. Would you use Michelle against the Bucs if Henderson can't go on Sunday?
Very doubtful. I think all my numbers here are right. He played 16 of 19 snaps after the Henderson injury. He had 10 carries, and I think he did run a route on those other 6 snaps that he played. So he was very involved. I probably should be higher on Michelle than I am, but I hate that matchup, and I don't anticipate any real rushing workload. And we love receiving for running backs, but if it's only receiving, that's a difference, even at a $5,700 salary.
Yeah, and like they weren't using I wouldn't be shocked if they just don't throw it to their backs because Henderson had 3 targets per game in the first 2 games before he got hurt.
Yeah.
So and Michelle's, I don't think he's as good of a pass catcher as Henderson. I know they just didn't use him maybe in New England, but he played well last year, but more as a runner than as a receiver.
And the very fact that he didn't play until Henderson was hurt they can't speak volumes of confidence into how much he'll play in week 3.
Agreed. Deontay Johnson missed practice Wednesday due to a knee injury. They said it's not serious, but it's still noteworthy that he missed practice. How are you viewing the Steelers entering this matchup with the Bengals?
So I don't really like this game. I don't have a whole lot of overall interest in it. None of the quarterbacks for sure. If anything, it'd be some mini stacks with either Joe Mixon, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and then Chase Claypool, most likely. That's kind of the way that I'm viewing it. I have this one of the 4 worst in pace on the week. We should see a lot of pass attempts, but I mean, the Pittsburgh offense hasn't been that inspiring. So
no, they rank 14th for me in projected efficiency this week. Cincinnati is 29th. So it's not a great game. I think that Chase Claypool is interesting at $5,800, but interesting does not mean I will necessarily use him. It's more so he fits the checklist of a downfield pass catcher in a spot where his team should be decently efficient because they're slight favorites at home. So Claypool I'm okay with. Najee I might have very limited exposure to, but he's oversalaried at $7,500. So I think that they're not as interesting for me.
Yeah, I mean, with Najee, we were just hoping for a touchdown last week. You have to love the snaps. You have to love the workload, but you don't have to love the offense. And then whenever you put that at $7,500, that's
he's at 65 yards from scrimmage per game, 21 adjusted opportunities. He does get a lot of red zone work, which is good. Yeah, but that's the one kind of saving grace there. As for the Bengals, T. Higgins didn't practice Wednesday. He's considered day-to-day. T currently leads the team with 28% of the overall targets through 2 games. So what would you do with them against Pittsburgh if Higgins can't go? Are we getting to Jamar Chase in that situation, or are we still muted because of the lack of enthusiasm around that team as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, again, I've said this before, but the NFL is not the NBA, and just because Jamar Chase might get a few more targets and Tyler Boyd might get a few. Actually, speaking of Tyler Boyd, going home, playing in Pittsburgh here.
Oh yeah, you're right. There we go. Hail to Pitt.
Yeah. If you take T. Higgins off the field, they're going to be at least a less efficient offense, and that is definitely a concern for me. So, I mean, I could see myself in particular lineups, especially maybe if I'm really considering receiver at flex, like a Chase, Jamar Chase Claypool.
Whoa,
stacks.
The Jamar Chase Claypool. There we go.
The Jamar Claypool
shoot together. Yeah,
like a mini stack. Realistically, I think that's going to be kind of my max exposure to this one.
Yeah, I think that Chase would work. Both Chases would work in this game, but that's it's not something I want to get overexposed because the game is not super enticing. I'm just going to note here that Dalvin Cook didn't practice Wednesday. He should be good to go. No concern for me there. They asked Mike Zimmer about his workload, and he's like, we need to win games. He's the reason we win games. So no, we're not going to lower the workload. Pretty sure that means he's going to play. So let's take a look at those 3 potential shootouts. 3 games here with a total of 54.5 or higher. So let's run through those now. First one is the Chiefs and the Chargers. Chiefs are favored by 6.5. They open at 7, so there has been some slight movement towards the Chargers. Salaries in the Chargers are super nice. I will say the total has gone down a point, and there is some potential wind in this game. Not super concerned about it right now, but just noting that. What is your optimal stack for the Chiefs versus the Chargers?
Yes. I think that's basically it. It's just a game where we can play a lot of different options. If I had to pick one stack, I think it would just have to include Patrick Mahomes over Justin Herbert, although I love Herbert, just from a sheer upside standpoint, with obviously either Tyreek Hill or Travis Kelce, because those are the only two other Chiefs we're considering, aside from some shares of Miko Hardman. But for a primary stack, it's going to be, I'd probably say Mahomes, Hill, and like if I go Mahomes, Hill, and Allen, like that's a higher salaried stack that's probably going to be least or less common than throwing in Mike Williams. So I'm trying to think of it from that perspective here, but I really don't think there's too many wrong answers with how you stack up this game. But I would try to be making sure that I don't just take value stacks here and make sure that I'm having some of those like high end stacks.
So I think that for me, the good thing is, or the tough part is trying to, like you said, avoid just like the lowest salary dudes, because that's the chalky way to do it. I can do that though. Like I can avoid using the lower salary guys while still giving myself flexibility by going Mahomes, Kelce, Eckler. Because if you do that, you're giving yourself the flexibility to use some lower salaried wide receivers. And those guys are available this week. And Eckler, tremendous relative to his salary at his position. Kelce, tremendous at his salary relative to his position. I think that's my favorite. Mahomes, Kelce, Eckler. I think that is my favorite stack for this game, just because of the way those players grade out relative to their specific positions.
Yeah,
I do think that within this one, though, Mike Williams, like you said, $6,000. He'll be a staple. He'll be a core play. Keenan Allen, 69, same thing. I want to talk to you about Miko Hardman. He is 50 something, 54, I think. Yeah, $5,400. Hardman got a lot of work last week. However, that was because the Ravens seemed to be like, we're going to put 6 dudes on Tyreek Hill and you do whatever you want. That's why Pringle scored. That's why DeMarcus Robinson had his touchdown. That's why Hardman was fine. And I don't know what the attack will be from the Chargers defense in this spot. So Hardman in the first 2 games, 17% target share. He does have 33% of the deep targets. He had 4 last week, none in week 1. How can you feel about Miko Hardman? Like $5,400, I think he's very risky. I don't want to think that last week was something that we'll see again. I wouldn't be shocked if that's his highest target total of the year at 8 targets. I want to be cautious and not overreact to that. So I think to me, limited exposure and making him very much a secondary part of game stacks and a limited option as a one-off is the way I want to play things here.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't even use him as a one-off. I think I'd rather find a few extra hundred to get up to some receivers with a little bit more of a secure role.
I think the one thing I would say there is I may have misspoken. I'm not going to have a lot of one-offs here because I'll be stacking this game in most lineups. Because like Eckler will be in a lot of lineups, Mike will be. So like he's going to naturally be part of like mini game stacks at the least, just because I'll have so many Chargers.
Yeah, I gotcha. But yeah, I mean, I did some research this offseason about like how often wide receiver 3s, and I know he's technically a wide receiver 2, but in this instance, Kelce's their wide receiver 2 or 1, depending on how you view it. But if we want literal points and not just like points per like dollar of salary,
which is the correct way to view things, I think.
I mean, his path to like literal slate changing upside isn't that high because the volume we shouldn't project to be as high as 8 targets again. It's going to be closer to that like 5 mark. And I know he can get downfield work. I know he's fast, but that's kind of a flawed way to view things. I've been guilty of that in the past, but it's not really just one long catch is enough if you're trying to put up 20 FanDuel points. So I think for me with Hardman, he'll be kind of an afterthought in my stacks here. He'll be part of them, but not someone I'm like trying to prioritize compared to a Mike Williams. So I think I'll probably just be lower on Hardman than you are.
I think he's like a 15% guy for me. Like I think that's fair.
I can see that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. This can be a yes or no answer.
Mm-hmm.
Clyde Edwards-Helaire, yes or no?
No.
Leaning no.
Leaning no, for sure.
Yeah.
If I can only pick one, yeah.
The Chargers' rush defense is very susceptible, and I think they're fine with that. Like, I don't think they care, personally, about, like, if they get gashed in the ground. So, like, it could be fine, but also, like, we don't know if his role will get decreased because of Darryl, because of the late fumble. I know he doesn't fumble, but, like, it happened in a high-impact situation. He's had a good role so far from a snaps perspective, but like from a usage perspective, he hasn't. Like he got no targets in week 2. He did run a lot of routes, which is good, but if I do use him, it'll be very limited. Very, very limited. Just too many, very obvious. Like I talked about paths to failure, his paths to failure are likely to hit. And I think that's why I'm okay potentially just missing out there. Tied with that game at the top of my offensive efficiency projections this week is the Vikings versus the Seahawks. Seahawks 1.5 point favorites, so tight spread there. This game is indoors. We love both those things. Pace here is not ideal. The Vikings 30th in situation neutral pace, and the Seahawks are 13th according to Football Outsiders. But from a concern perspective, that's literally the only thing I can come up with is pace. What's your view of this game between the Vikings and the Seahawks?
So I have this one rating out better in my pace numbers with pre-snap win probability between 20 and 80%. I have this one actually 4th on the main slate because Philly and Dallas is not.
Okay.
So I'm not concerned about that. And these are really two teams where they tell us where the ball's going. And there might be the Freddie Swain touchdown. I get that, but that's kind of the outlier for these teams. So there is immense value in knowing where the ball is going for offenses. One offense I'm high on this week that doesn't really have that. The Cardinals is someone I'll talk about that team more in detail, but we don't have that issue in this game. So I love it. My primary stack is going to be a little bit chalky, but just Russ, DK Metcalf, and Dalvin Cook.
Yeah, I think that I think this game is my favorite to stack this week, all things considered. Given the tight spread, given that it is indoors, we know where the ball is going. And there are guys in this game I can cross off. I don't want to use Chris Carson, so I can be like, this is logical. I can go Russ. Let's do this now. Russ, Metcalf, Dalv. I can do that very easily. So I think to me, it's the best stack on the slate. I think Russell Wilson might be my number 1 quarterback of the week, ? I love everything about this game. I do. Again, I want to acknowledge the concerns, but given that it's the Seahawks facing an offense that will score some points, we know where the ball is going. I kind of think it's number 1 for me.
Honestly, I wouldn't have a whole lot to say against that. The more I look at this one, last night I was trying to figure out my favorite stacks for another piece of content that I do, and I was like, it has to be in that Chiefs Chargers game, but I kept coming back to like Russ and Metcalf.
Yeah,
and so I think maybe that's telling me something here. So it's a lot more salary friendly as well.
Yeah.
I would have no issues putting this one first.
Okay. KJ Osborne. He is $5,100. He has 19% of the team's overall targets through the first 2 games. Only 2 deep targets, but that is 25%. He's been productive in that volume. If his salary were like 57, I'd be like, no interest. But like 51 in a great game where he's actually getting good usage, I kind of feel like that's enticing to me. He's like Hardman where he's not a core play, but I would like to use some KJ Osborne this week. What are your thoughts on him specifically?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about him last week, and he had that long catch. But the reason that I was drawn to him was just that he's running a lot of routes. You put that in an offense that's capable. There's appeal in that. Now, I know that I just said we got to watch out that we don't do like the Miko Hardman thing where he's probably not going to get us 20. But at 5,100 within game stacks, like it's these guys are justifiable if we like the game. If we don't like the game, we shouldn't be playing guys down in this salary where their roles are shakier. With Osborne, I would probably anticipate he has a higher target share than Miko Hardman. I'd feel safer in that just because they probably won't go to Hardman as much. But yeah, I'm cool with Osborne at 5,100 if I'm stacking this one up. Yeah,
we're talking about like actual points in terms of making perfect lineups. Like the cutoff for me at receiver is they need 85 yards or 2 touchdowns to make a perfect lineup. He had 91 last week and a touchdown, 76 yards in week 1. They're going to have to score to keep up here. So I think Osborne, not a core play, but he'll be one of the lower salary receivers I turn to a decent amount. If you want pace, you can check out Bucks Rams. The Bucks are 1.5 point favorites here. It opened with the Rams as 1.5 point favorites. It did flip though. Defenses are good, but the offenses are sick and they'll operate pretty quickly. So where does this game rank for you among the big three, and how are you stacking it?
So speaking of teams that are just kind of harder to stack, and we might get some clarity with Antonio Brown out, but the Buccaneers are always kind of hard for me to stack, just because they will share the ball. Rob Gronkowski is the biggest overperformer from an expected receiving FanDuel points mark compared to his actual. That could continue if they just keep throwing him touchdown passes at the goal line, but this one's a little bit harder for me to stack. I do not envision myself playing Tom Brady, just because he doesn't have rushing. Same for Matthew Stafford. The best part about this game, though, I think, is expected pass volume. We should probably anticipate that the Rams just air it out and don't try to run the ball at all. I have this one fourth on the main slate in combined, situation dependent pass rate, which I like that. But Cooper Kupp's salary's up there. I don't ever feel comfortable with the Buccaneers. I love Mike Evans, but he is like a 20 or a 0 waiting to happen. So outside of I feel best honestly with Robert Woods in this game. So maybe I'm too low on it, but what are you seeing here?
I like it a lot. I think the under is probably the best bet for this game. But I do think that Stafford is in play, $7,600, because we talk about how Brady is too. We talk about how you need to go bananas as a passer to be in the perfect lineup without rushing, but both those guys can do that in this specific script.
That's true.
So I do think they're both very much in play. I prefer Stafford by a hair personally, just because I don't think they're going to run the ball at all in this game, which is really nice. So I do think Stafford, $7,600 works. On the Bucks, I have a heavy preference for Chris Godwin. Godwin, the first two games, leads with 23% of the overall targets. He is I didn't get a lot of deep work in week 2, but he had 3 targets there in week number 1. And he has 29% of the red zone targets. That's not bad. So I think that Godwin is the guy to go to here. The gap between him and Evans is $200. And I think that Godwin has both a better floor and similar upside to Mike Evans. Cooper Kupp, amazing relative to his role, or relative to his salary at 79. I know it's a high salary, but still works. But I agree with you that Woods at 61, let's say I am not stacking this game. Let's say I'm doing a Kyler lineup or doing a Russ lineup, and I want exposure to this game as a one-off. I think that Woods is probably the best route for doing so. And I say that while acknowledging that Woods has run fewer routes than Van Jefferson, acknowledging I'm not generally a Robert Woods guy. I think he tends to be a bit overrated in fantasy spheres, but 24% of the overall targets through 2 games. He's been getting some deep work. He has 30% of the red zone targets too. I think it's a good spot to get back in on him, even if, again, I'm not a huge Woods guy in general.
He played 98% of the snaps last week, 88% on the season. That first week, he didn't really play a whole, I think he was at a 73% snap rate, 83% of the routes on the season, 1.5 red zone targets per game, 2 end zone targets per game, 1.5 downfield per game. His expected receiving FanDuel points per game is a 12 even. He's averaged 10.2. Cooper Kupp, with all that extra volume, is at a 17 in terms of expected. So it's 5 points. I'm not saying that's nothing, but it's a tighter gap than I think than a lot of people would realize. Kupp has overperformed easily. He's not going to score, 3 touchdowns or 1.5 touchdowns per game the rest of the season. But
are you sure?
I would. Right. Would you like to make a bet?
No.
But yeah, I think there may be some slight concerns with Robert Woods, but they're not enough.
I did misspeak. I said that Woods might be my favorite one-off exposure to this game. That's actually Tyler Higbee at $5,500. I know last week was trash, but tight end is trash. I think that if you're not going to Kelsey or Waller, Gronk's fine. I know he's overperformed, but he's getting good work and he's $6,500. I think you expect them to pass a lot. Pitts is fine. Hawkinson's fine. I like Mark Andrews a decent amount this week, but if you're looking for a salary saving tight end who has a good role, I know that the targets were not there, but from a snaps perspective, he has not missed a snap this year. Higbee's $5,500. So I kind of feel like he's going to be my preferred route here. I'll have a lot of Woods and a lot of Higbee as one-offs, but I do think this game is pretty fun for stacking, focusing on Godwin on the Buccaneers and focusing on, a combo of Kupp, Woods, and Higbee for the Rams.
Yeah, I mean, this one's just more of a mini stack game for me. I know you said Stafford and Brady are some of the few kind of outliers for us at this point where we can consider them from a sheer passing volume standpoint. But some of the research I've done just suggests that guys who are projected for a lot of fantasy points strictly through passing kind of underperform.
Yeah.
And that's my big concern here.
Okay, rank these games. Let's put Arizona and Jacksonville in there. I know we're talking about that later on, but rank those 4 games for stacking. Go.
Okay, so Seattle, Minnesota, Chiefs, Chargers, Cardinals, Jags, Bucks, Rams last.
Only thing I might do is flip the final 2 there.
I figured, but
worried about the Jags offense. If I felt better about the Jags offense, I think I'd go higher, but I think for me, I think that's the only flip is those 2. I agree. Seattle 1, Kansas City 2. Let's move now to our trends discussion for week number 3, focusing on some process-based stuff once again, because it's still early on this year. We'll get to some more specific stuff in the later trends. But let's start things off here with you. And you're talking about running back and defensive correlations and looking at the way those 2 positions tie together. What did you see when diving into the data there?
Yeah, it's turned into a deeper dive than I wanted. It took me about like an hour and a half to get all the stuff I wanted lined up in my spreadsheets. But I mentioned last week I need to do a better job with my defensive research. But I figure I could at least, pair it up with some RB defense correlations, which are pretty prominent in DFS analysis, and it feels like the right move often. I have game logs since 2012 for RB1s, and the way that I'm defining an RB1 here is the highest projected back in a backfield based on numberFire's pregame projections. Then, combine that with their team defensive output. The correlation between the FanDuel scores between, again, those RB1s and the defenses is a 0.09, which is quite minimal. It's not nothing, but it's small. And if you actually look at games in which that RB1 put up at least 30 FanDuel points, the correlation between the defensive score and the running back score is a negative 0.11, which implies that you kind of don't really get those huge games from running backs paired with great games from their team defenses. And among that subset, again, 30-point running backs, the defenses averaged 8.1 FanDuel points. For context, overall defenses average about 7.3 FanDuel points. So that's 0.8 points. That's not nothing. But if we lower that threshold to 20-point games from running backs, defenses average 7.5 FanDuel points. So again, a little bit above average, but not substantially so. And here's the thing to keep in mind. If you're stacking a running back in his defense, it is almost assuredly because the team is at home, they're a favorite, things like that you're really looking for from that correlation, where the running back's going to like milk the clock and the defense is going to shut down the opposing offense. Odds are in those situations, defenses are coming at higher salaries, and they historically have. If you looked at the sample of running back ones who were at home and favored by at least 6 points, their defenses averaged 8.7 FanDuel points per game. So again, 1.4 points higher than the full subset of FanDuel defenses. But those defenses, again, with those home favored running backs, they had an average salary of $47.50 on FanDuel, and I'm not really about like a $46, $47, $4,800 defense very often. Historically, 12 FanDuel points has been about like an 80th percentile outcome for a FanDuel defense. The split between defenses that actually score 12 FanDuel points, it's about 50-50 between defenses with a salary of 4,600 and higher or 4,500 and lower. I'm sure overall the sample is much larger for just defenses that are salaried at 45 or below, but we also can kind of cross off some of those defenses we would not consider. So, I mean, like, yeah, maybe there's some merit to stacking your running back with your defense just because on average they score a few more points, but it's really not worth it long term to be spending up at defense even in some of these spots where we're going to get home favorites later on in the year. So I don't see a whole lot of reason to do this. And again, defensive, like figuring out what defense I want to use is typically a flaw in my process. But looking at this, I don't think stacking is kind of all it's made out to be. So any thoughts here on what I said? Any thoughts on just kind of how you stack your defenses, if at all?
I think the key thing is something that you said pretty early in that trend, and you would probably agree this is the key takeaway, but getting blowups from your running back and blowups from the defense at the same time is pretty rare. And I think that is very easy to explain, because how do you get a blow-up defensive game? You get a defensive touchdown. If you get a defensive touchdown, that gets the opposing team the ball back, which means your running back has less volume to work with. So I think that it's very easy to figure this out. Like, I think if you want the best example possible, go back to last year, week 2, Colts, Vikings. The Colts defense, I think, had 2 defensive touchdowns. There were a lot of people who stacked the Colts defense with Jonathan Taylor, but because the defense scored twice, they never had the ball. So if you're looking to win a tournament, you need blowups, need to give yourself the chance for blowups at each position. And it can happen. There were times last year where a running back was stacked with their defense in the perfect lineup last year, but I think it is less prevalent than we might assume. So I'm not saying actively avoid a running back defense stack, but I would agree with you where I'm not actively seeking it out either. I'm not actively avoid might actually be an okay term to use for it, because I don't want that overlap if I can avoid it. I think that's the way, and it is a big deviation from what I used to do previously. So if we're thinking about ceiling, thinking about upside, thinking about taking down tournaments, I agree. It's not my preferred way to do things if I can avoid it.
Yeah, and I did some analysis too on how frequently running backs get to 20 FanDuel points and defenses get to 12 FanDuel points again, like kind of 80th percentile outcomes, numbers you kind of need to win like the Sunday Million, like a big tournament there. The odds that the teammates in this sense, I'm just going to call the defense a teammate, but the odds that they have those big games in the same game is about 4.9%. And if you pair up to a random defense with a random running back, it's about 4.4%. So maybe a little bit higher, but not substantially so. And especially not worth, again, you're not really stacking like road underdog running backs with road underdog defenses. We're looking at higher salaried guys on both of these positions. So it just isn't something that I think needs to be discussed as much as it usually is.
I would agree with that for sure. So it's not where you need to avoid it, but like maybe lower your enthusiasm around doing it, I think is the way I would say that. Let's move now to talk about some bookmaker info once again, because last week we talked about the scary nature of non-competitive games, teams that are heavily favored. We want to avoid players in games that are not supposed to be tight, not supposed to be competitive. But what about the mid-range spreads? You know, what's the value in players, not in hyper-competitive games, like not a Seattle-Minnesota game, but where the spread is also not massive? Because it's relevant this week, because we've got Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes all favored by somewhere between 6.5 to 8.5 points. So we'll expand that a bit here and look at spreads from 5 to 9.5 points. At quarterback, we don't need to care too much about roster rates. As you mentioned last week, we can just look at performance here. And last year, 19% of all teams were favored by 5 to 9.5 points. So keep that in mind as the baseline here. 19% of all teams were in this range. 29% of all quarterbacks in perfect lineups were in that range, 5 to 9.5 points. That's a decent amount above the overall population. To me, that is a very good thing for the quarterbacks we talked about before. I'm still going to prefer tie games, which is why Russell Wilson may be number one for me, but there is zero level of concern for me around Kyler, Lamar, Mahomes with regards to the other team keeping pace. At running back, 33% of perfect running backs were favored in this range. That is, again, compared to 19% of the overall sample. 29% of popular running backs in the FanDuel Sunday Million were in this range. So the public may have actually underinvested in this range. So the two key guys who popped there are Nick Chubb and Derrick Henry, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but don't do it. Chubb doesn't do a ton for me, but I think that with Henry, that is encouraging for sure. So not that you need the reason to use Derrick Henry, but it helps. At receiver, it was 20% of perfect wide receivers were in this range. That's compared to 21% of popular receivers, 19% of all receivers. So it was in line, neither a plus nor a minus. I can stack receivers in this range, but I'd still prioritize the guys in closer games that they're standalone plays. So like Rondale Moore, DeAndre Hopkins, those guys are fine. But if it's a standalone play, I'll skew towards the closer games. Tight end was similar to running back. 29% of all perfect running back or tight ends came from this range. The public did use those guys pretty often, but that's fine. So I think the biggest takeaway here is that we shouldn't overlook Kyler and Lamar. Not that any of you would, but to me, it's encouraging just because they're not in one of the big three games this week. It also helps confirm for me that I still want to skew toward the tight games for wide receiver, specifically for running backs and tight ends. I can be more flexible in these scripts. So are you getting to Kyler Murray, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen this week, or are you trying to focus on the shootouts at quarterback?
Well, I know we'll talk about Josh Allen in your second trend, so I won't focus on him, but I do like him. Kyler, obviously, it's going to take a very specific game projection not to want to play Kyler Murray or a salary that is just unattainable. And I don't think it's unattainable this week. I actually love Lamar Jackson. He might be my favorite quarterback of the week.
Cool.
Simply because we know the rushing is there. He's averaged 237 passing yards per game. I think he's at 235 and 239 in his two games. But the Detroit just sets up as such an easy pass defense that, kind of the issue with Lamar is, maybe he'll run for 60, 80 yards, obviously upside for more, but is he going to throw for any touchdowns? Is he going to kind of flirt with 250 passing yards? Are any of his receivers going to be relevant in this specific matchup? I think that those are just guesses. He has a very obvious path to doing that. So I might be highest on Lamar, which is fun because people won't be because there's so many other options in those better games. But I mean, when Baltimore puts up massive outputs, it's through Lamar Jackson. We know that. So I like all three of these guys, and they're not cross-offs just because they're not in those shootouts.
I think this is the best counterpoint to Justin Fields is that there are guys who are in amazing spots. It does mean that, maybe it's tougher to get to Kelsey and stuff like that. But I think that I agree with you. Lamar is in a tremendous situation here. You can run it back with TJ Hawkinson if you use Marquise Brown, run it back with maybe Quintez Cephas if you decide to go with Mark Andrews, which I don't mind, or maybe DeAndre Swift, probably not, whatever. But I do think that the situation sets up pretty well for Lamar. So I think of that group, and that's also the best counterpoint to Josh Allen, who we'll talk about later on. But I do think that it's really hard to say no to Kyler and Lamar. The problem that I'm having is it's the same problem as with running back last week, where I feel really good about a good number of guys, and I don't want to spread myself too thin at quarterback because I'm just setting myself up for failure and not being able to take advantage when I'm right. And that's what I want to do.
Yes. And I mean, specifically at quarterback, scoring is typically flat-ish, where the top guys are going to be, kind of bunched unless one guy really separates. You can get more separation with like a Derrick Henry outburst at running back. So it's one thing to keep in mind. You don't have to feel like you need exposure to all of these quarterbacks, but I keep going back to Lamar and the odds. I mean, I have legitimate odds for certain things, but just thinking, ask yourself, what are the odds Lamar Jackson gets shut down by Detroit and is irrelevant? It seems
actual odds, probably negative 7%.
Right. Like Mahomes and Herbert and some of these other guys, it's a divisional matchup. You never know how those things are going to go. So I don't really see issues for Kyler or Lamar this week.
Yeah. So if we're talking about paths to failure, which is a term that I use a lot, there aren't a lot.
Yeah.
And the odds of those paths hitting are small. Mm-hmm. Preference for you between Kyler and Lamar?
I think I'm going to go Lamar for the salary savings because it will help this week. So that's kind of where I am. I figure it's Kyler for you.
I think I like Lamar more because I don't think the opposing team hates their coach, and that might help in terms of keeping the game competitive. So I think that helps. Let's move now to your second trend, talking more about those Cardinals, specifically the pass catchers, because I think that this is really interesting. In the past, it's been with Kyler. You just use him with Nuke. Who cares? Might not be the case anymore. What are you seeing with this Cardinals target share entering a matchup with a team that might actually just hate their coach?
Well, this is kind of a shorter trend, but I think it'll lead to more roundabout discussion. When we talk about the Chiefs or like the Seahawks, we know where the ball's going. That's something we've already talked about on this show for this week. We don't necessarily know that anymore with the Cardinals based on what they've done with their pass catchers through the first 2 games. And that is problematic because we want to play Kyler Murray. And you can play Kyler Murray without his pass catchers, but honestly, with the success rate of like when you lock in that a quarterback has a big game, his receivers outperform baseline expectations. So you, in very rare instances, should want to play a quarterback without his pass catchers, just from a probability standpoint. So we need to figure out who we're playing with Kyler, provided that we are playing Kyler this week. And even if we're not playing Kyler, we still want to figure out if we want exposure to these pass catchers. But through 2 games, Rondale Moore has 13 targets. DeAndre Hopkins has 12, same as AJ Green. Christian Kirk and Chase Edmonds have 9, and Max Williams, their tight end, has 8. So that puts 6 players on this team between a 12% and a 20% target share. That is not particularly good. I rag on the Colts all the time for not giving guys 20% target shares. It is a very different situation because it's a much more efficient offense. I get that, but we still want that guaranteed volume. And DeAndre Hopkins, I love him. His salary is $8,500. He cannot get you like 12 FanDuel points and be worth it. It just doesn't work that way. He should, over the full season, should surge out ahead in target share, but he's not there yet. They might not need to force him 30% of their targets if they have, I know, AJ Green, but he has an 88% route rate. We can say that AJ Green is irrelevant, but he's not. So we should not say, we can't say that AJ Green's irrelevant. That is easily the second best route rate on the team behind DeAndre Hopkins. And we have Rondale Moore, who's 5,600 this week, and Christian Kirk, whose salary is 5,700. So they're at those low salaries. AJ Green, by the way, 5,500. But it's possible that Rondale Moore gets more involved, but for right now, he's not running a whole lot of routes, and you could make the case that leads to a bust week, especially in a week where they may not need to throw the ball as much as they have been. So I don't really know what to do with these pass catchers. Do you see any path to solving that equation for this week?
The only thing that I know is I will not touch AJ Green.
Yes.
He is a thorn in our side. He is not a usable DFS piece. I don't think you were saying that, but no. I just want to clarify. But no shot. I think that with Moore projecting to be pretty popular this week, I would guess, based on the buzz he's gotten. He was a waiver wire pickup this week. That tends to lead to some interest. And the fact that there are some 5,000 range receivers I do like, that's part of why I think this game is less attractive for stacking than, well, it's part of why you think that Lamar makes a lot of sense this week over potentially Kyler. But then also, I think that's why I prefer to stack the Rams Bucks over this one, is because the one guy I feel good about relative to salary is Moore, but he's also the one guy here who will probably be most popular. So I kind of think that I'm going to wind up being under on this game, which is scary because I think that it's a good game. I just think that there are issues within it. I still will have Kyler because Kyler is freaking amazing. His floor is stupid. His ceiling is stupider. So I think that like a Kyler, Nuke, Marvin Jones or something like that makes a lot of sense. But I think that I will have less exposure to that than I will have to the other games where I feel better about the target shares this week.
Yeah, I know I said that I liked this game more than Tampa Bay and the Rams. Maybe I shouldn't, just because you pointed out like I pointed out that we don't know the target shares here that well, but it's just really hard not to rank a game with Kyler in it above a game where I don't really want either quarterback.
Yeah.
So,
okay. Yeah.
But I do love Marvin Jones. So
yeah.
He's the obvious bring back. I'd be cool with just going. I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to be very unpopular relative to the other guys in his salary with Tyreek Hill right there. So for me, the Kyler, Nuke, Marvin Jones stack might be a really strong like single entry kind of approach this week.
Not totally off DJ Chark. He's getting a lot of uncatchable balls. So like we joke about prayer yards, he's getting those. He's not getting air yards, he's getting prayer yards.
Yeah.
But like he's getting downfield looks. So
yeah, he's got 9.
Yeah, I'll mention that. But a lot of paths to failure there. Let's move now to talk about the pace for Buffalo and Washington, because I've not been in on Josh Allen the past 2 weeks because facing super tough defenses. Gets another one this week with Washington, and they're on extra rest after playing Thursday, but this game has at least some interesting components to it. The first one is it's a fast-paced game. The Bills lead the league in situation-neutral pace through 2 weeks, according to Football Outsiders. Washington is 8th. Both those teams were above average in pace last year. Buffalo ranked 11th, and Washington was 14th. Other interesting thing here is that Taylor Heineke hasn't been bad. He's at 0.19, passing that expected points per dropback through those first 2 games. He was at 0.10 last year, including his playoff start. And that, to me, says he can do enough to keep this game competitive. The problem is I do respect both defenses a bunch. Washington ranks 5th in my projected numbers. It's a combination of 2021 data, mostly still preseason priors. Buffalo ranks 10th. But we know defense is fluky. Weird stuff can happen when we rely on defense. And that's the one thing standing in my way of this game being fun. So I am interested in some Josh Allen, Stefan Diggs, Terry McLaurin stacks, but I also don't want to get too spread out at quarterback. And that's my primary concern for this week is getting too spread out. So can I lop Josh Allen off, Brandon, or is this game enticing enough where I should still be in?
So we talked last week in detail about quarterback popularity numbers, and it just doesn't really matter. I think Kyler led at like 12.9% in the Sunday million, something like that. It's just they don't get that high, and people pretend like, the assumption is that they are super chalky, and it just doesn't work out that way at quarterback because there are so many options. So I'm not going to say we should play Josh Allen because he'll be under the radar and we need to pivot from the chalk. That's not the case. But we know that Josh Allen has the upside to lead a slate in FanDuel points. He has shown that. And his receivers, specifically Stefan Diggs and Emmanuel Sanders, have underperformed their roles. And that leads to regression. And it's very easy to look at the guys who are converting, someone like a Cooper Kupp or a Tyler Lockett early on, and start to forget about the guys who aren't putting up these big games. But this one is a really easy stack too. So that's appealing to me, where we'd have Josh Allen and Stefan Diggs or Emmanuel Sanders, and then bring it back with Terry McLaurin. There are paths to this game, like you would say, not really having a whole lot of points. Yeah. There's a chance that Josh Allen is not who he was last year. He's, I think, 4 for 18 on downfield attempts. Not very good. Easily the worst among guys with like more than 10 or 15 pass attempts there. So there's a chance that just nobody converts. But again, I say this with golf all the time. If Josh Allen is a terrible downfield passer, again, it's like the decline of his ability to throw the ball downfield, or it's just a kind of a cold streak. You want to kind of buy in on those low, have those buy low opportunities. So I like this stack, but only those 4 guys. Or, well, Tony Gibson's a low salary, but I would throw Logan Thomas in there too because he's
revenge game,
a ton of routes.
Yes, no, revenge game. Who cares about the routes? Revenge game. He could run one route, but it's a revenge game. So one thing I will say is there is a difference between saying to avoid a guy because he'll be chalk at quarterback and saying a guy is enticing because he'll be low rostered.
Yes.
Because if I'm looking at RotoGrinders roster rate projections right now, if player X is on 5.7% of all rosters and he goes nuts, the competition for the top prize is whittled down quite a bit. So like if you think Josh Allen will fly under the radar, which they don't, I will note that they do project him to be, up there. But if you project him to be low roster, there still are advantages to that. So I think that's the one thing. You don't need to avoid the chalk at quarterback, but you can seek out under roster guys. Allen could be that this week. I kind of think Russell Wilson might be the guy after looking at these numbers. So, but I think that that's good for Allen. I think that because I want to be concentrated at quarterback, I think that what I'll try to do instead is actively make sure I have Stefan Diggs, Terry McLaurin stacks just to get exposure to this game without spreading myself too thin at quarterback. That might be the route that I take here. Again, I think that Allen's a good play, but because I need to be concentrated at quarterback, I might wind up just doing it with Diggs, McLaurin, and getting my exposure that way.
Yeah. And I mentioned last week when going over quarterback exposure numbers, it's still better to have a quarterback at 5% than 15%. Sure. I'm not arguing against that.
Right.
But I don't want to pass up a ton of exposure to someone like Russell Wilson's a bad example. Maybe Lamar.
Mahomes is always the best example. Mahomes is never more rostered than he should be. Never. Not a single time in his life.
Well, I was trying to say like someone at a similar salary who's going to be way more popular this week. So like I don't want to pass up Lamar just to try to get to Allen if I think Allen's going to be less rostered. But I agree with you. I think that eventually people are going to be winning tournaments with Josh Allen and Stefan Diggs stacks, and that would not have surprised anyone entering week 1. It shouldn't surprise us entering week 3, and sometimes it can be easy to forget that. So don't do that. Yeah,
and again, you can get exposure to this without spreading yourself too thin. I think that might be my preferred route this week is Diggs plus McLaurin. Let's talk about weather briefly. There are a couple games with some noteworthy wind. It's not like, oh my gosh, what's going on? But like, just check back on it on Sunday. Winds worth monitoring for the Browns and the Bears. 13 miles per hour right now. Not a concern there. Something to watch.
Over under 20 rushing attempts for Justin Fields. Then if it's windy,
under. Just in case you're asking seriously, just in case. 13 miles per hour now, not a concern. Something to watch, though. Same thing for the Giants and Falcons in Jersey, where they're at 10 miles per hour. Again, nothing right now, but just check back on it later. Wind speeds in Kansas City for the Chiefs and Chargers are at 16 miles per hour. That's the point where I start to downgrade, guys. I think we said last year it was a 7% decrease relative to projections for guys in 15 plus mile per hour winds. I'll check back on that, but we have seen guys historically underperform projections in games with that kind of wind, and the total in that game did come down a point. So just noting that now, no freak out yet, just noting it. And winds are at 13 miles per hour for the Bills and Washington. Slight chance of rain there. Just check back on those later on. But let's move now into our position by position breakdown for week number 3. Starting off at quarterback, Brandon, who are you going at this week on FanDuel?
Really hard to narrow this down, honestly, but I'm going to go with Lamar Jackson, number 1 here at 8,400. He's averaged those 237 passing yards I talked about, and 1 passing touchdown. More obviously, we're interested in those 14 carries per game for just shy of 100 rushing yards. He has 2 red zone carries per game, which is 33% of the team's red zone rushes. And the thing for me is the Lions are just by far the best passing matchup possible at this point. That benefits Jackson, who the question for Jackson is never really the rushing. It's can he add any passing to kind of get one of those ceiling games for him? And I think the answer this week is yes. My second love is going to be Justin Herbert, just because I think he's shaping up to be a regression candidate already. 337 yards per game, but just 2 total passing touchdowns, slightly above average adjusted expected points added per drop back. We know the stacks for the most part. Like you can play him with Keenan Allen or Mike Williams. You could throw in Jared Cook there. I'd be fine with that. He's got 4 rushes per game. It's not a whole lot of production on them, but he could always kind of get like a 20-yard carry or something like that if things work out that way. And he's yet to have a breakout game. So he might not be with all these quarterbacks. He might not be as popular as he probably would deserve to be within the context of that game.
Yeah, I think that they all make sense. And Herbert, I might lop off from if I'm looking try to concentrate my exposure, but I'd like to get there. But again, it might be like the Allen thing where like I just
right. So so the question, I'll let you give your picks, and then I'll ask who you're including overall.
Okay, so my first love is Russell Wilson. I do want to say Mahomes is amazing. He's not either of our loves, but like he's amazing this week again. You don't need me to tell you that, but like he is. Russ is indoors, tight spread. Seattle ranks 3rd in projected offensive efficiency by my numbers. Minnesota is 5th. So that's great. We have logical stacking partners, just 2 dudes to use here. I think Russ, if I have a single entry slate, He's going to be my quarterback there. Second one is Justin Fields, because he opens up so much without limiting your upside, because he gets a full practice with the ones, full week of practice with the ones this week. He is throwing it deep. His ADOT last week was 11.3. Not the toughest matchup. Cleveland ranks 27th by my defensive numbers, and we can use him as a way to go all in on stacking the other games. It can get you access to Kelsey, Eckler, can get you access to Metcalf, Dalvin, et cetera, et cetera. So using him as a catalyst for stacking other games, I think is in play. Again, it's really tough to pass over the other guys, but I think I can get exposure to them via their pass catchers, and that does help me a bit. So what are you thinking here?
So I think the real question is, again, I'll publish odds for this on Friday morning on numberFire, but the odds that Fields puts up like 25 or 30, it's not out of the question that he gets to 25. I'm not sure that passing is going to go from kind of 0 to 60. And
I think that's the difference, is I have a pretty high opinion of his passing.
I have a neutral opinion of his passing at this point, just because I think long-term it'll be there. But I don't want to get out over my skis with Justin Fields again, because it's going to come directly at the loss of these other elite quarterbacks I already love.
Okay, so quarterbacks ranking for me this week: Wilson 1, Mahomes 2, Lamar 3, Kyler 4, Fields 5. Might cut it off there. I might not get to Brady or Stafford. I'm okay with them, but I might not get there.
That was going to be my main question whenever you said about not getting to Josh Allen.
If I'm lopping off anyone, I'm lopping off guys who don't run. That's if I need to make that cutoff, that will be the criteria I use.
Yep.
Okay, let's move now to running back. What do you have there?
I mean, it's that
you
simple,
agreed.
honestly.
You agreed with me, and it was just I was unsettled. You don't do that. We don't do this very often, so it caught me off guard.
Just play the quarterbacks who run the ball. That's
easy
it.
Game.
I love Dalvin Cook at 9,500. I really hate running back this week overall, so I'm just sticking with Dalvin. I know he's not 100% healthy, but the team said they're leaning on him. I think the metaphor was like the throttle was like pushed forward with him still. 31 adjusted opportunities per game, which is carries plus double your targets, to account for the value of a target, even on a half PPR site such as FanDuel.
Crazy.
60% red zone rushing share, 44% route rate, 5 targets per game. Seattle's not particularly good against running backs, so I want that. Austin Eckler is my second love at 7,000. No targets on 24 routes in week 1, 9 targets on the same amount of routes in week 2, 61% of the snaps. And for this next bit, just remember, there are 32 teams in the NFL.
Really?
Kansas City's ranks against running backs thus far: rushing net expected points per carry, 32nd, rushing success rate allowed, 32nd, adjusted rushing fantasy points per carry, 32nd, and adjusted receiving FanDuel points per target, 25th. So I know it's not the quad factor, but that's pretty good. And then my third love, it was a note to my future self this week, Saquon Barkley. In week 2, on short rest, he had 83% of the snaps, 83% of the red zone rushes, 3 targets, 75% of the routes. Atlanta is 27th in rushing success rate allowed to running backs and 23rd in adjusted receiving FanDuel points per target allowed to backs.
Yeah, I think that Saquon is the kind of lock button guy for me. He is also my third love this week. I can't provide a counter example for you.
I don't know if we talked about him enough within the context of how that goes with the quarterbacks and stuff.
Yeah, it makes it a lot easier to get to all those guys. So
Justin Fields and
I'm going to use Justin Fields and Saquon first of all.
Okay.
So I just entered my bobblehat lineup against you.
Justin Fields lineup
for now. I might change it later, but he's in there. I think that with Barkley getting 5 of 9 red zone chances last week, he ran routes on 2/3 of the dropbacks. That was on 3 days rest. He's now on 10 or 9, whatever. So I think he's kind of the highest exposure running back for me this week. I think that Dalvin's number 1. I agree with that. But if we were to talk about Derrick Henry, I think that he had 6 targets last week, 4 the week before that. Should get a positive script here, especially because we have potentially Brent Hundley or Jacob Eason not starting. But it's also not so positive based on what the bookmakers are saying, where they stop trying. And I think that's a good thing here. The Colts defense has looked more vulnerable this year. It seems like Darius Leonard might not be fully healthy. So I think that stacks up pretty well for feeling pretty good about Derrick Henry this week. My second love would be Eckler. Probably pretty boring to double up on him. I would say Eckler, Saquon, Dalvin are the core plays for me this week. If I were to provide like a counter in this situation, I think it'd be between David Montgomery and Joe Mixon. Both those guys, at least interesting in that range. Montgomery at 69, Mixon 67. Mixon has a better workload, but Montgomery isn't an offense I feel better about this week because they're facing a less threatening defense. Montgomery getting good work, 98.5 total yards from scrimmage per game so far. 30% of the team's red zone opportunities, 18 carries, 2.5 targets per game. Did leave week 1 a bit early due to injury and had a good role in week number 2. Maybe we get that situation where a rushing quarterback opens up more lanes for the running back. So I think if I were to pick someone outside of Eckler in this range, I'd go Montgomery over Mixon by a bit just because I feel better about the overall workload there. But it's really all about Eckler in this range for me. I just, giving you more dudes to consider. Let's move to wide receiver. Who stands out to you there?
I've got Stefan Diggs. It's 7,700 again. I had him last week. Sticking with him. Obviously, I don't think either of us are going to talk about like Tyreek Hill, but play him if you can. Stefan Diggs, 7,700.
You prefer Hill or Kelsey in one lineup?
So there's the replaceability aspect with Kelsey, but the sheer upside for Hill is like immense.
Like a 40 burger gonna come from Hill.
Yeah.
So
it's always like a coin flip. I think for this week, I might lean Kelsey just because there are some receivers I prefer at lower salary, like that I like, not necessarily prefer straight up.
Yeah.
So probably Kelsey by a little bit for this week. But
Stephon
Diggs due for some regression for sure. Still 12.7 FanDuel points per game, but should have about 16.3. 92% of the routes, 11 targets per game. 129 air yards per game, but just 65 actual yards per game. I know we need Josh Allen to get a little more accurate on those deep balls, but we also want the downfield attempts anyway, so I'm sticking with it. 28% target share for him. I also like Manny Sanders in that offense. He's getting a very good workload. He's 5,200 for this week.
Yeah, I agree.
My second love is Keenan Allen at the $6,900 salary. 87% of the routes, 10.5 targets per game, 104 yards per game. Hasn't scored yet. And if he's going to do it, feels like a good spot for him to do it in. 24% target share with a slightly higher ADOT than Mike Williams. Only barely, but 2.5 downfield targets per game, 2.5 red zone targets per game. Just an elite workload. And he's yet to have like a massive game here. And my third love, not digging under 6,000. There are plenty of receivers I do like, but I think Robert Woods is a really good play for this week at 6,100. Part of that elite game that is in that top tier. 83% route rate overall. Played 98% of the snaps last week. Week 1 was he wasn't quite as involved. 4 end zone targets, but just 1 score. 3 red zone targets. 3 downfield targets. Tampa Bay has not been particularly stout against receivers once adjusted, so I think Woods at 6,100 is possibly a bobble hat lock for me this week.
Might already be in mine. We'll say that. My first love is DK Metcalf. It's similar to the Keenan Allen discussion where we've seen production from the other wide receiver, but this guy's gotten good usage. In the 2 games so far, Metcalf has 31% of the overall targets, 33% deep, 50% in the red zone. They're playing indoors. He stacks really well with Dalvin Cook. I think Metcalf is superb this week. My second love is Mike Williams, $6,000 for tremendous usage. He has 26% of the overall targets, 30% deep, and 28% in the red zone. The Chiefs do tend to be good against wide receivers, but I also don't care. So I think that 6,000 is too low for Mike Williams. So Mike will be back in my lineups. My third love, I was going to go Darnell Mooney. I'm going to stick with him. I'll stick with it. I thought about pivoting to Kenny Galladay. I think
a Mooney field stack opens up a lot.
It does. I think that Kenny Galladay, though, is worth noting at $5,600, given that he got 4 downfield targets in both games, was it? It was either 4. in one or 4 in both? Let me just check this quick. I've got it right here.
Was
He's
also
4 in
playing
both,
with 4 in both,
and he's facing the Falcons.
Well, he also has. We can say whatever we want about his quarterback, but James Jones has been one of the best downfield passers since the start of 2020.
I'm glad he's got one thing going for him.
Oh, and what do you have? 96 rushing yards last week.
I'm glad he has one thing going for him. Let's just do Kenny Golladay. Whatever.
Okay.
Okay. In the first 2 games, Golladay has 6 and 8 targets. He had 4 deep targets in both those games. He had a red zone target in week 1, none in week number 3, but like $5,600 for a guy getting that downfield work at home as a slight favorite against this secondary. Sick. I don't mind having both him and Saquon in the same lineup. Totally fine by me, given that their production doesn't overlap too much. Running back and wide receiver stacks were actually in perfect lineups a decent amount last year. So I think that having Golladay in there with Saquon is fine, but I do like Mooney. I don't mind Rondell despite the popularity. Miko Hardman, 54 works. KJ Osborne at 51. I like Manny. You alluded to him at 52. I would say commit to your mid-range and top-tier receivers. Rotate through the lower salary guys. Chase Claypool's in there too. Quickly, are you going to use Cordell Patterson or no? He can be a run. You can use a running back in your wide receiver slot, $5,900.
No, his role is like way overstated.
Is it though?
Yes.
Played every single red zone snap in week number 2. He had 4 of 9 red zone chances in week number 2. We've seen teams do this with speed guys in the past. Curtis Samuel last year, Isaiah McKenzie for the past 16 years for the Bills.
Oh yeah, all the times I played Isaiah McKenzie on FanDuel.
I used Curtis Samuel a lot last year.
Curtis Samuel's different
at this exact same salary, and I think that we're getting in a range where Cordero might have a kind of a similar role, and you can use a wide receiver or a running back at wide receiver. I'm just saying, it's not outrageous to talk about him.
34% snap rate running back at wide receiver.
I'm just saying. I think he's worth considering. That's what I would say. I don't think it's preposterous to bring him up is what I would say.
It's not, but I'm not going to use him.
Thank you. Let's move now to tight end. Who do you have there?
TJ Hawkinson. 6,300 will be playing from behind, and if you're not going to have a very efficient, high-scoring offense, at least play from behind and be a tight end who, is treated as a receiver, which Hawkinson definitely is. Leads all Detroit skill players in snap rate at 88% and route rate at 87%. Nobody else is really close. Nobody else is even above 70% in either of those. 21% target share and 2.5 combined high-leverage targets per game, which is red zone plus deep targets for me. Second love is Jared Cook at 5,300, running 60% of the routes. Should have 9 FanDuel points per game, but just at 6.2. He's averaging 6.5 targets per game. It's a 15% target share in a game that we like a lot. 1.5 red zone targets per game, 1 end zone target thus far. And I think you said the Chiefs pretty good against receivers generally. Not quite so good to start the season against tight ends. 25th in adjusted FanDuel points per target there.
Yeah, David Njoku got a bunch of downfield work against them in week number 1. My first love is a guy we were poop talking on Monday. That's Mark Andrews. He could get completely overlooked due to the low target numbers, but he's still running a ton of routes. He has 19% of the targets for this team, which is not nothing. We saw George Kittle and Robert Tonyan have success against Detroit in limited volume. So I think that Mark Andrews is $6,000. I would prefer Marquise Brown if I have a Lamar lineup, but I don't think we should write off Mark Andrews yet, just because the usage has been underwhelming through 2 games. I think Andrews is in play at $6,000. I also love Tyler Higbee because I love to double down when I get stuff wrong. So let's just go right back. He is yet to miss a snap this year. He is the lowest salaried access, relevant access to this game outside of Actually, no, he is the lowest salaried relative in access to this game. I lied. The Bucs let up 10 targets tight ends in week 1. They let up 9 in week 2. I'm going to give it a shot again. I just think, again, I want to find low salaried ways to get access to high scoring games. Higbee is that, plays a lot of snaps. Let's get him in on that breakfast table with Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp, and let's get some targets out to my guy, Tyler Higbee. Let's move now to defense. What do you have there?
I have the Raiders at 4,000. Pro Football Focus has them with a top 8 pass rush matchup, or I guess specifically like Miami with a bottom 8 I don't know. Either way, Jacoby Brissett took a sack on 9.1% of his dropbacks in week 2. They are 4.5-point favorites at home, so should be a little bit competitive. We want games where there's some action because, again, about 60% of FanDuel points come from sacks and interceptions, so I'll take that at that salary.
Yeah, Brissett he didn't look good last week. Yeah, that offensive line is poop. Could be bad. I think the Giants are pretty fun at defense at $3,900 because Matt Ryan might be cooked. He ranks 32nd in passing net expected points per dropback out of 35 guys with at least 15 dropbacks. He's above. Not a great list. A lot of rookies. The defense has not played well at the open for the Giants, but I think their defensive coordinator is pretty good. They played decently at times last year, so I don't mind the Giants. Don't mind the Falcons on the other side of times, given that Daniel Jones is their quarterback. But just putting that out there. I think the Bills at 41, the Browns at 42 are both under salary as well. That is all that we have here for today. Brandon, any final thoughts for you before we send people off to fill out their lineups?
It's going to be really easy, even if you're playing maybe 20 lineups, to want to get sprinkles of all of the quarterbacks. I know it's tough, and I'm saying this for myself as well. You can't play everyone. So just try to figure out who you Jim would always say go through and actually rank them. Yeah. And go from there, because it's going to be really easy to want to play, 2 lineups of everyone, even if you're playing like a 20 entry max.
Right. That'll be my tough thing this week, is narrowing down quarterback. Running back is very easy to narrow down. Like I have to work to expand it. Yeah. But quarterback, I need to narrow it down. I need to sit down and decide, okay, who do I need to have? Who am I okay glossing over for me? Quick reminder again, to get yourself entered in the Listener League for this week, go to FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. $5 entry, 3 entries max. There is no rake for this contest. FanDuel.com/league/Listener League. That will be the URL the rest of the way. So once they get the lineup up each week, you can enter over there. Also, make sure to subscribe to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We are back here once again on Monday, 9 a.m. Eastern, to wrap things up, go through the biggest takeaways from the week from a DFS perspective, and get a quick look at week number 4 as well. Brandon, if people have questions for you on Twitter, where can they find you there?
I'm at Gadula13, GDULA13.
You can find Brandon today at 4 p.m. on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages, breaking down the single game slate, a thriller between the Panthers and the Texans. I am on Twitter at Jim Saunders. No, come on, man. Come on. Actually, I don't know. Either way, this is why you're doing it, not me. I'm on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcasts. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for this week. Good luck to you in week 3. We'll talk to you on Monday to wrap it all up. This has been the Heat Check Fantasy Podcast, powered by numberFire.